Welcome back to Specialness Season 2. Today we're going to be talking about started to say normal. That's a horrible thing to say. Our neurotypical child, Jackson, and what his experience has been like. A lot of people have been asking us,
Right.
What's it been like for your other child to grow up with someone like Cason in the household?
Yeah. So we were talking about how the most questions we got were about our marriage, and then the second was Jackson.
About our family, essentially.
Yeah.
How Jackson was doing.
How is Jackson doing now? How was it being a sibling of someone with special needs? And how in the heck did he make it through? He is 19, almost 19 and a half.
He is.
So he's had quite the journey himself.
But you need to keep watching because maybe there's twists and turns in the story.
There's always twists and turns in the Cribs.
I'm trying to build a little drama here.
Household.
Okay. So anyway, we're here to talk about Jackson.
Yes.
And how Jackson's 2 decades in our household have molded him into the man that he is.
Right.
So I guess the best place to start is the beginning of Jackson's life.
Right. And that is, I know we've talked a lot about this in other episodes, that he's adopted. And when we made the decision, well, we wanted lots of kids. And
lots?
Well, at least three.
Right. Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
So we had Cason. And so we didn't know obviously how long the adoption process would take. Cason's was about total 9 months, which is pretty quick for domestic adoption. So we didn't know how long it would take, and we were hoping we wouldn't have kids real spaced apart real far. And so we started the whole process when Cason was just about turning 2. And if you've watched other episodes,
which you should have.
At 2, we had no idea what Cason was going to turn into.
Yeah, at the time we just thought he was just a difficult redheaded child.
Yeah, even though he'd ripped the blinds out of the wall and stuff, we just kind of at the time were like
isolated instant.
Right, like okay, he's going to be a hard kid and stuff, but we had no idea the hardships. And then we had a couple failed adoptions, like we said in the last episode, before we ended up with Jackson. And by the time we did get placed with Jackson, Cason was almost 4.5. And if you recall, that was right about the time where things start to kind of go out of control with Cason. He was already doing OT for the sensory issues, but we had no idea for really how things were going to progress.
We certainly didn't know that 2 years later someone would be telling us to institutionalize him for the rest of his life.
No.
Right.
So when we get the call and, we're so excited and everything, it was not running through our heads of, how is Cason going to affect this sibling, this new child we have in our life? And now that we're 19 and a half years into that, over those 19 years,
we're just starting to figure it all out.
Yeah. We've had some guilt of making that decision to bring Jackson into our world, because it's been hard for him. And, it's hard for us, but it's been really hard on him. And, as a parent, it's hard to kind of separate that guilt of, should we have even done this? He could have had a better life somewhere else, whatever. But ultimately, we always come back to the fact that God has a plan and that he was 100% supposed to be our child. And we're so thankful for that. He has brought a lot of joy to our life.
And some normalcy.
And some normalcy to our life. It's given us a little bit of a chance to parent a, quote, neurotypical child. Even though Jackson has ADHD and dysgraphia, his life, he's great, and so we're very thankful. Yes, we have guilt, but we wouldn't have it any other way.
Right. And we already spent an entire episode talking about grief, which was tied. I think guilt's tied into that.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk extensively about that guilt, which if Jackson's 19 and a half, our guilt probably goes back about no less than 18 years.
Right.
Maybe the first. No, I think we're going to probably 19 years.
Yeah.
Probably 19 years of guilt.
Pretty close to 19 years. And, I mean, we've had conversations with Jackson now kind of about that, but we'll get into that later, his reaction to that and things like that. But, so here we are bringing a newborn baby into our home right about the time, the wheels are shooting off and Cason.
The lug nuts are definitely loose.
Yes, absolutely. And, I'd say the first 6 months of Jackson's life was pretty darn chaotic. He was around so much yelling and screaming and chaos that, looking back, I'm not sure how we did it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But there were so many times where I would, you're at work and I'm with this baby and I would be feeding him or whatever, and Cason is going insane and I'm having to act like this is the most normal thing. Like, this is how everyone's household is. I would sing to Jackson. I would get a book. I'd get a little toy. I'd do whatever as Cason is destroying the house, as Cason's going crazy. At one point, Jackson was probably a little over 6 months old, and we were doing some ABA therapy.
Yes, we tried ABA therapy with Cason.
And it was an in-home. She came to our house, and
it was short-lived.
Didn't go so well, but that's another story. And she was working with Cason in a separate room, and so I always was with Jackson in a different room. But there was this one time where she needed me to come in to watch what she was doing because we were going to be implementing some of those techniques or whatever you want to call it later in our, you and me. And so I had brought Jackson into the room and I was feeding him at the time, and Cason all of a sudden would have none of it. She ended up having to restrain Cason because he was getting violent. And, like I said, Jackson's a little over 6 months old, and I'm, given him his bottle, and he just literally like tensed up and his eyes get real big, and like it scared him just hearing that. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this doing to him? And so I had to leave the room and, again, just trying to act like everything's normal. But that was kind of I would say is one of the first times I remember thinking, what is this doing to Jackson? This can't be good for him to hear this, even though he's 6 months old.
On a daily basis.
Right. And
hourly. I mean, when he's awake, he hears it.
Right. He hears it and he sees it, and we're not child psychologists or developmental pediatricians.
Well, we weren't then.
No, but I don't think we realized even at that time how much that was affecting Jackson at such a young age. And that kind of where the guilt comes in.
And, I think there's a tendency to think, well, I mean, he's only 6 months old. He's not going to remember this. But obviously that sticks with people. Even if they don't remember it, that trauma still embeds itself and it carries over.
It does carry over.
He experienced a lot of it.
He did. So when we've talked about the quote incident, that time where I picked Cason up from school, and
for reference, that's episode 3 of season 1.
Right. So Jackson was 1.5,
Mm-hmm.
and I had woken him up from his nap that day to go pick Cason up, and he had his little square binky, blanket.
Oh yes, his light blue blanket.
Yes, that he took everywhere with him, and so he was still kind of groggy asleep, and so he had that with him. And like I said, we didn't live that far from the school at the time, so we didn't have that long of a drive to get home when that whole attacking incident happened. But that was the very first time Cason had been physical with Jackson. And I'm doing everything in my power to keep Cason away from Jackson. I was like, if he's going to hurt people, let him hurt me, not Jackson. And so, I'm pushing Cason away and all that stuff. I'm getting hit and hair pulled and all that kind of stuff. And I look back because I had that child mirror thing so you could see behind you. And Jackson had his blanket up over his face, like shielding himself. And he's screaming, he's crying. But the fact that he was using his security blanket, his blanket that he took everywhere with him, and he had it up literally over his face and his head, and he's, doing that. And he was 1.5.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my gosh.
And Cason was literally, he was attacking him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I obviously finally, got a hold of Cason and was holding him, pushing him on the other side of the car. But Jackson was screaming. Jackson's terrified. And I am again trying to act as calm as can be. I wasn't yelling at Cason. I wasn't raising my voice. I was just telling Jackson, it's okay. Mommy's here. We'll be home soon. Trying to act as normal as can be. All the while I'm saying to myself, this is not normal. This is not healthy. And I feel really, really bad that Jackson is a part of this.
And this is because you didn't bring a snack.
Because I didn't bring a snack.
And so just by proximity, he was attacking Jackson because he was in the back seat.
He was in the back seat.
Right.
So that's when we got home. And that's, if you remember the story, I got Jackson out of the car, left Cason in the car because I was just like, I've got to, you were going to come home anyway, all that stuff. So I ran with Jackson upstairs.
Obviously, you hadn't called me yet.
Yeah, I hadn't called you yet.
Yeah.
Ran with Jackson upstairs and lock our door.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Jackson's, I think I had brought his little diaper bag thing with him. So that bag was with us. And so he had some snacks. He, had his little juice thing. Our room had some of his toys in it. We already had some books and stuff in our room. So I go in there, trying not to just bust out into tears. Like, I cannot believe this is happening. And didn't know where Cason was. I didn't know what Cason was doing. But at that moment, that's, when I called you and I'm sitting in our room and I'm singing to Jackson and calming him down. And again, everything going through my mind was, what are we doing to this child? And he didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for this, but right. Jackson did not ask for this.
And so there was probably let's call it a 15-minute period before I could get home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, talk about that 15 minutes with Jackson. You've run up to the room, you've locked yourself in the room. What was going on, and how was Jackson responding to that?
He was very clingy to me. He did not want me to put him down and walk away from him, even though we were in our room or whatever. I just held him. He was like grabbing onto my shirt. He was crying. And I just, like I was saying, I just would sing to him. I had his favorite book with me, and I was like, you want to read this? And I was trying to distract him. But at that same time, that's when Cason had come inside, knew we were in the room, and was trying to pop the lock to get into the door, and was yelling he wanted to kill us and everything. And I'm having to sit back with my thumb against the lock so he couldn't pop the lock, and he's banging on the door. And so every time Cason would hit the door so hard, I'm leaning forward. And again, I'm having to just try to calm Jackson. And it's really hard to try to calm your child and say, oh, everything's okay, and let's read a book, when he can hear, not that he understood what Cason was saying, but he heard it. And I know he heard when you got home, that whole fiasco outside our door. I know he heard when you finally got Cason into his room, because we were in there. I remember how long Jackson and I were in our room. It was quite a while.
Yeah, because I had to first
restrain him in
the hallway.
Yeah. So it took a while for us to feel okay. It's okay enough for Jackson and I to go downstairs to try to continue having a quote normal life, and let's play with your toys that are downstairs. Let's, at one point I was like, it's time to cook dinner. And, and he was in the kitchen with me and just trying to act as normal as can be, even though what was going on upstairs is far from normal. He eventually let me, put him down, and I turned on some music so he wouldn't be able to hear what was going on upstairs as much. But anytime he would hear something, or I made a noise with cooking dinner, or the dog barked or whatever, he would literally jump and look around, and he was scared.
Yeah.
And he's 1.5. And after that whole incident, that was a big changing point for us.
Yeah.
Where, not that we wouldn't ever protect our kids, both Cason and Jackson, but it was so obvious that day that our number one priority, obviously keeping Cason safe, but was to make Jackson always feel safe, never to put him in a situation where that could happen again. In fact, we ended up buying a different car, because the car that I was in was a smaller SUV at the time.
Right. So
Cason had a lot more access to Jackson. And so it was shortly thereafter we got a much bigger SUV, where once we got Cason that special 5-point harness thing where he really could not get out of, there was no way he could get to Jackson. Because obviously you can't be with me all the time. And right. When I'm taking them places or taking Cason to therapy or whatever, Jackson was with us. And so we had to really, you and I had to stop and be like, okay, what can we do to make Jackson stay safe and be safe? So one of the things we did was we got an alarm and put it on Cason's door.
Yeah, and to explain what that, it was a chime alarm.
Yeah.
So when the door opened, it would sound off a bell in our room on a monitor.
Right.
So we could tell when he was getting up.
Right. And because we were like, we can't have him come out of his room and go into Jackson's room. We needed to know where Cason was at all times. So we put an alarm on the door. We had already put
Thankfully, he never did.
Never go into Jackson's room. No, he came out of his room all the time, but
he came out of his room all the time. He never went into Jackson's room.
Right. No, that's a God thing, I think, because that could have been a nightmare. We would have never slept if he started going into Jackson's room.
Right.
We had already put up sharp objects. Cason didn't have access to that, so we were good. And then we just made it a point that they were never to be in the same room together without one of us. Not that at that age would we leave them, but it's even to the point where if you and the boys were in the playroom and you got up to go walk into the bathroom to get a Kleenex for some reason, we wouldn't even allow that.
Yeah.
You would take Jackson with you or Cason with you, because we'd never wanted Jackson to see it was just him and Cason.
Right.
Which is sad. And it's sad that
and it also certainly contributed to our isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It was Cason's unpredictability was already contributing to us not going places.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just had him. When we got a second child, now we're having to worry about the appearance of what if he attacked Jackson while we were at a picnic or
Mm-hmm.
someone's house or something.
Mm-hmm.
We just did not want to put ourselves in that position, much less Jackson.
Right. And
so it was further isolating us from everybody.
Right. And it was always, especially when they were little like this, it was, you were at work and it was me and the two boys. So Jackson never got a break from that.
Right.
He was around it all the time. And then we've mentioned that we started Cason in preschool and how that went, but it did give Jackson and I some time while Cason was there, even if Cason only made it an hour that day or whatever, or on the days he actually made it the full amount of time and I didn't get a phone call to come pick him up or whatever, it actually gave Jackson and I would say, quote, normal mommy son time. You know, we would go to the park, just the two of us. We got into a play group so he could be with, you know, kids his age. We actually were able to play with toys that made noise. Like he had this fire truck and it was a very loud fire truck. Well, Cason hated sounds like that. So Jackson couldn't just go pick up whatever toy he wanted when Cason was there.
Right.
Because you never knew how Cason was going to react to it. And he knew pretty quick. Jackson knew, ooh, that's a toy I can't be a part of or whatever, even at that really young age.
Yeah.
So he loved it. I loved it. It was like a glimpse of what, quote, normal motherhood was like. It was the first time I had experienced it because I had not experienced that with Cason up to this point. So it was nice.
And I think that was another tough realization too. Not only because there was a sense of normalness after, you know, 5 years or 6 years or however long it was until Cason started being away for a period of time. But you also start to feel guilt about, gosh, it sure is nice when Cason's not around.
Yeah.
And that further complicated things too.
It did. And it I think kind of opened our eyes a little bit to really how bad Cason was, because when it was just Cason, we first time parents, we had no idea what, quote, normal. When I say normal,
well, we were pretty sure it was.
Well, no,
but yes,
but especially
we didn't realize how much we were walking on eggshells.
We did not realize what it would be like to have a, quote, normal child.
Yeah.
That you could just go, hey, let's go to Target and pick him up and put him in the car and go to Target. Like I hadn't been able to do that ever with Cason. And that just became kind of a norm, you know. But with Jackson, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of fun. I like this. I can see why people like want to have lots of kids and stuff. Because with Cason, it just wasn't like that. It was hard. It was scary. It was sad. It was not fun.
Well, and it was also the realization that, and we've mentioned this before, but it was the first realization that, were we really parents to Cason, or were we really just kind of caregivers? And at the time, we wouldn't have called ourselves caregivers. Mm-hmm. Were we babies, Cedric?
Yeah, you know, felt more like.
Were we just trying to contain him,
right,
you know, and manage
right,
him?
Right.
Because we weren't able to parent like normal parents.
Not at all. So Jackson and I, like I said, we both really enjoyed our time. But what's really interesting was when I would get the phone call from the preschool saying I needed to come pick Cason up, and I would tell Jackson, like, okay, bud, we have to get in the car. We need to go pick Cason up, or we need to go pick up your brother. Or if Cason did make it through the day and it was carpool time and we had to go, Jackson's mood would change almost instantly. And obviously my mood changed too, because I knew what the rest of the afternoon, I knew what the rest of the day was going to be. But for Jackson at such a young age to sense the difference of having his brother around and not having his brother around was really eye-opening. And sad that he was so aware of it. But he literally, would become kind of quiet. I think he was a little fearful, actually, to, get back, get in the car.
Was very fearful.
Fearful of what Cason was going to be getting in the car, because there were days Cason would get in the car and he would be more manic and he would be laughing, and Jackson thought that was hilarious. I mean, Cason would make these crazy sounds with his mouth, and
you can only imagine that at his age, he thought, oh, maybe that's just not going to happen anymore.
Yeah.
And you don't put together that this is something that's not normal.
Right. Right. And we didn't know at the time this was bipolar. We did not know that's why Cason's being hilarious and funny and crazy, not angry. We didn't know at the time. And Jackson loved it when Cason was manic, because Cason actually was funny. He did some really silly, kind of crazy things, but Jackson thought it was funny.
And he was also kind of doing it for Jackson. He was like, and he was acting like a brother. You know, he was engaging Jackson.
Yeah, which
now whether he knew it or not, you know, that's to be discussed at a more psychological level in time. But Jackson felt like Cason was engaging him.
Right. He did.
Entertaining him.
He did.
Making him laugh.
Right. But that manic time period wouldn't, it's not like it would last for days. I mean, literally, it could be 30 minutes. It could be 5 minutes. It could be an hour.
It could also switch in for no reason.
Yeah, because there were times where Cason, I'd pick him up and he would be just laughing for no reason, just hysterically. And Jackson would start laughing and Jackson would react to that. And that pissed Cason off, that Jackson would think at this particular moment that was funny. And he would stop and he would start yelling and telling Jackson to stop looking at him.
And I also think at that time, part of the difficulty was, you know, Jackson was trying to interact in a typical brotherly way. His older brother, I think naturally someone he would look up to for guidance, you know, because he's older, he's done things, he knows how to do this. And so when Cason would be laughing, he would laugh because he thought, something is funny. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to partake of this.
Right. And something as simple as like, which brothers do all the time. Jackson had his little blue blanket or whatever, and Cason would reach over and take it from him, laughing, thinking this is funny or whatever. And Jackson would kind of try to grab it back and he'd grab it back. But then the next time Cason took it from him and Jackson tried to grab it back, Cason would hit him and be angry about it. So Jackson never knew what is the appropriate, what am I supposed to be doing here? Or do I laugh?
One time he'd be laughing with him, and the next time he'd be telling him not to laugh at it.
Right.
You know, it was extremely unpredictable.
And confusing.
And very difficult for someone who is 2 years old to understand.
Right. Very difficult. It's hard for us as adults to understand.
I'm not sure I understand it now.
No.
But yeah, it was difficult for a 2-year-old to be navigating that emotional roller coaster.
Right.
And he did that his whole life.
Right. So Jackson, then I put him in a Mother's Day Out program for just a couple hours a week because he really enjoyed being around kids. And
something he wasn't
really doing. Yeah, because remember, we had said we had not been going to church. So Jackson didn't get that experience. He had his little play group. But he liked being around kids and he was a social kid. So I thought, okay, this would be a good idea to put him in a Mother's Day Out program for just a couple hours. And he loved it. He didn't have, again, I'm basing my parenting off of what happened with Cason, where I would drop Cason off and he would be screaming the whole time and I'd get phone calls. So I was nervous about it. Like, oh my gosh, this is not going to go well. Jackson's going to cry. He's going to have separation anxiety. Like Jackson was fine. He literally walked in, looked at me, smiled, waved. And I was like, this is so weird. But I guess this is what neurotypical children do. They want to be with friends and leave their mom for a couple hours and have fun. And he did. He loved it. But as he got older and he started going, you know, and one extra afternoon a week or whatever, the teachers started noticing, and I would get the feedback from them, that Jackson was mimicking, they didn't know it at the time, but the way they were telling me.
They described it as he was being aggressive.
He was happy, but the way he would engage with some of his peers, was more in an aggressive type way, or how if he wanted a toy somebody had, he wouldn't just do the neurotypical ways. He would literally run over and attack the kid, not like tackle him and laugh or whatever, and haha, I took your toy. It was things that the teacher was like, we might need to discuss this. And so then I went in and talked to the teacher and explained, well, he has a brother who's 4.5 years older than him, who is having multiple issues. This is what he sees. This is what he thinks is normal. This is how you get a reaction from a peer. You go and pull their shirt, you pull their hair, you
Draw a block on their head.
Bite. Jackson started to bite. Yeah, drop a block on their head. And we were like, oh no. And of course, our fear, I think at the time was, dear God, please let this be something not like what happened to Cason. Like,
I think what we were thinking was, once is a chance, twice is this a trend? Is this us?
Yeah, I'm like, they're not biologically related. This cannot be this. No,
this is us.
This is, yeah. So we made the decision. Jackson was almost 3.5, close to 4, I guess, where we were like, okay, we need to find him a play therapist. Because in reality, Jackson was not turning into Cason. Jackson does not have any Cason's issues whatsoever. He was fine at home, very loving, all that kind of stuff. It was just in certain situations. And so I was like, okay, we need to get a professional to just look at him, let them understand our situation, and kind of go from there. And so we found a play therapist who worked with Jackson. We needed her to help us explain to Jackson in a very, very young child's mind that his brother's brain is broken, that his brother's brain works different, very different from your brain and mommy and daddy's brain. And how do we get that across to Jackson? Because you and I can say it to him all we want, but at the same time, we're the ones that are there when Cason's attacking us. And what does Jackson understand? That are you and I involved in that? What does a kid understand?
And I think it's also, in hindsight, we're not aware of this yet, but he is already seeing and picking up on that we have to treat the two of them very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And in our mind, we're just trying to protect him. We're not making a conscious decision to treat them differently, but we are.
Right.
And he is picking up on that. And
even at that young age, what we tolerate from Cason and what we don't tolerate from Jackson. So the confusion is already starting. Right.
And
yeah, because we said Jackson was very confused. He was walking on eggshells like you and I were walking on eggshells. And like we just said, we didn't understand it. We still don't understand it. How can you expect a little child, understand it?
Barely a child.
How can they understand it?
Right.
The 1 minute you can touch Cason, the next minute you can't touch Cason.
The messages were very convoluted.
Yeah.
From both Cason and, frankly, from us. In what he observed.
Right.
And that ends up, we'll be talking about that quite a bit. That ends up really being a pervasive issue, in a lot of ways as he grows up.
Right. And when Cason started hallucinating, which, go back on those other episodes, that was happening, but we didn't realize they were hallucinations. We didn't understand it. But again, imagine yourself having a young child whose brother is saying, there's a scary old man around the corner. I'm not going into that room. And he's terrified. He's not laughing. He's terrified. What is that going to do to your 3 and 4-year-old?
Especially when you still have this sibling respect, right? If my older brother is scared of something that's in the next room, even if I can't see it, it must be in there.
It must be in there.
Because why would he be doing this?
Right.
So it was, I can't imagine what
was
going through
when Cason would
3 and 4 years old.
Yeah. Or when Cason would hear the rainbow on his wall talking to him. Literally, I remember Jackson walking in there, but I want to see a rainbow. And I was like, oh, bud, there's no rainbow. This is just your brother's brain playing tricks on him. And Jackson's kind of looking around like, what? Why?
Yeah, that's a very difficult concept.
Yeah. Or when Cason was like, the green army men are flying around the room. Well, what little boy doesn't want to see green army men flying around the room? And so very confusing.
Yeah.
For Jackson, and scary. like I said, when Cason would see things that were like the old man, was terrifying to him, and Jackson was terrified. So we see this play therapist, and when I met with her first, I go in and I'm telling her all of this, and she's looking at me like, okay, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great. She worked with Jackson on him learning to express to you and me his fear, because he didn't ever say anything. We saw it in him, but he didn't.
And I don't know that we'll ever know, but I think that part of that was his own defense mechanism, and also his own desire not to complicate our lives any more than it already was.
Right.
I don't think he put all that together,
No.
but I think that's what was manifesting itself
Right.
in his mind, is that, because I mean, I can relate to that to some degree as an only child in a home where there was a lot of fighting between my parents. There is just this natural instinct to not be the problem.
Right.
And I think that Jackson was doing part of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he also didn't understand his feelings.
She helped us come up with the safety plan that Jackson was very aware of. We came up with the safe word, which was squirrel.
Do you remember what that was from? Where he got squirrel
Up.
from?
Is it from Up?
Yes, from Up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jackson knew that, because the whole goal here was we wanted Jackson to always feel safe. And in the moment when Cason was ramping up, or something was, and I could sense something was coming, instead of it being a big deal and being like, okay, Jackson, you need to leave the room, and then that would make Cason more upset. All I had to say, Jackson, was squirrel. And he knew he needed to go to the safe room. And we came up with the plan that the safe room was our closet in our bedroom. So it was upstairs, way out of the way. And he knew it, and we practiced it. And when like Cason was at preschool and it was just the two of us, I'd be like, okay. And again, he's like 4 or 5 at this point. And I'm like, okay, Jackson's squirrel. And he'd look at me and he'd run up the stairs and go. I told him, like, we put some of his books, we put some stuff, it's a couple of his stuffed animals and stuff in the closet. So it's not like he's just sitting in there by himself, with nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea wasn't for him to stay in there for very long. It was just enough for him to get away from what was happening at that moment with Cason, until either you could come home or I could get Cason calm enough, and then I would go up and act with Jackson. Okay, everything's good. So we practiced that. And again, that's, as a mom, you don't really ever think you're going to have to come up with safe words and have safe rooms for your child to go into, but we did. She was really good about reminding Jackson over and over and over that mommy and daddy are never going to let something happen to him, that you are safe with mom and dad. Cason is Cason. He is not you aren't part of what's going on with Cason. And if you're ever scared, you can go into the safe room. That's, mom or dad will know that's where you are. And again, like, we practiced it, and Jackson got real good at doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting though. Now, if you ask him about it, do you remember I asked him the other day if he remembered what the safe word was?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he's like, no. Like, he remembered there was, but he didn't remember what it was. But he knew where the safe room was. He was like, your closet. And I'm like, yeah. And he's 19 and a half. And that just shows you what has stuck in his mind.
And the idea of a 4-year-old needing a safe room,
yeah,
is another heavy burden for a parent to carry. It's also not a topic of conversation you're going to have with anybody you know.
No. Yeah. Where's your safe room? Oh, for a tornado? No, for your child, when the siblings gonna hurt them. Right.
We were now more aware of, well, how do we prevent Cason from influencing Jackson?
Right.
That is parenting. How do we figure
that out? Yeah. How do we navigate this?
And part of that was having a safe room.
And yeah, it's a very confusing time. And what was so unbelievably eye-opening was the day that Jackson had his session with the play therapist, and she had multiple rooms, and she had said, hey, Mom, I want you to come in here, and I'm going to put Jackson in this room over here so he can play with some stuff, but I want to talk to you. I want to show you some stuff. And I'm like, okay. And so I go in, and in the room, she had one of those sand tables, and it had figurines and stuff in it. And she was like, so I just wanted to show you and recreate what Jackson did today. And I was like, okay. And so there were 4 dinosaurs in this little sand thing. And she had said to Jackson, where's Mommy? Where's Daddy? Where's Cason? Where's Jackson? And let's have them interact. Let's have them play. And so she was like, and here's my mommy dinosaur and my son. And, so she was interacting. And Jackson,
so she basically guided him to say, let's use these figurines to create a family situation for you. So you tell me which of these dinosaurs is who.
Yes.
And then he did his thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is where I was like, oh, this is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So she says, Jackson picks up the mommy dinosaur and the daddy dinosaur and the Jackson dinosaur. And he puts us in a corner, and he takes his dinosaur and he picks up Cason's dinosaur, and he stomps his dinosaur over. Oh, okay, and she's the therapist, but she was telling me this is him as a 4-year-old expressing to you his fear, his distaste, his everything towards Cason. He doesn't want Cason part of your family, because when he was done jumping all over and burying Cason, he went over to Mommy and Daddy and played and did fun, just happy. Like she said, his demeanor totally changed. Cason's not part of that. Mm-hmm. And she was like, that was really good. That's what you want to see.
That's really good.
Yeah. This is what you want to see that's how they express, it's play therapy. That's why it's called play therapy, because he's not going to sit there and talk to you. She goes, but that was very telling to her. And so from that point on, she continued to use the sand table, but she used pictures and stuff too. And in a lot of the drawings or anything, Cason was never part of the picture. Jackson made it very clear that Cason he didn't want Cason, and he wanted nothing to do with Cason. And that stuck, I would say that, I don't know how to say it, Jackson's interpretation of Cason, Jackson's feelings of Cason's, that from age 4 stayed until I would say the last several years of him having this, I don't want Cason in our family. I don't want anything to do with Cason. I'm angry with Cason. I'm resentful of Cason. I'm
resentful of what Cason has done to me and my family.
Into my family, yes. And he was protective of you and me. He made that very clear in a lot of his activities that he did with the therapist. And that was one of many therapists Jackson's had over the years. This was not the only one. As he got older and needed different kind of things, different help or whatever, and understanding Cason, we would change therapists. But that was pretty eye-opening, just because we knew Cason was affecting Jackson, but for her to show me and explain it to me, I was like, oh my goodness, that's a lot. That's a lot of burden for a small child to have. So Jackson, let's see, he starts about kindergarten age or whatever, and we knew at this point Jackson's probably going to have ADHD, just because of his behavior and his hyperness and stuff, very different from Cason's mania and stuff. But we knew once he got into school and he had to sit in the classroom all day, it was going to be an issue. And it didn't take long before the school is saying, Jackson's standing on the table, dancing when everyone else is trying to listen to the teacher and stuff. So we ended up taking him to see Dr. T. We started low dose ADHD meds with him, and that kind of starts his relationship with her. But it was interesting because we also kind of wanted her to see Jackson because she knew Cason so well and she knew us so well that we wanted to make sure Jackson was okay mentally. Is there anything else we could be doing to help him navigate Cason? And she told us, I don't remember, he was probably 5'6" or so. Cason was not, this is when Cason's really not in a good place. And she explained it to you and me that Jackson is basically living in an abusive relationship. And she said, just like in a marriage or any other relationship, there's abuse. What is the number one thing a therapist, doctor, or whoever's going to tell the abuser? You need to leave.
Leave the abuse.
You need to leave the abuse. Well, in this situation, and it's not just our situation, it's any special needs family that has any kind of aggression with a sibling
or a child,
or that child has aggression, that's an abusive relationship that those siblings, those kids cannot escape from. What are you going to do with your 4 and 5-year-old? How do you separate them, right? You can't escape the abuse. Now, at that point, like I just mentioned, we had already set up our safe plans and safe rooms, and we made it a priority to keep Jackson safe. But when Dr. T had mentioned that Jackson's basically in an abusive relationship and you and Jeff are going to have to do everything you can to try to escape that abuse for Jackson.
Yep.
And it's going to be really hard. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to end up separating your life starting about now.
Yep.
Because now that Jackson started school and he's going to have his own life, you guys cannot involve Cason in Jackson's life. You're going to have to start not living separately, but living separately.
Well, and that, right. We didn't live in a separate house or something, but what ended up happening was, this is normally the case with someone with a boy who's turning 5 or 6, they're starting to play some sports and soccer and t-ball and,
Cub Scouts
and Cub Scouts and all that sort of stuff that their friends in school are doing. And, the emails are coming about, hey, we're forming a pack, a den, or we're forming a soccer team or whatever. We want him to be a part of that. And so on Saturday mornings, when you go to a soccer game, not only did we know Cason would not handle that situation well,
mm-hmm.
Jackson didn't want him there either.
No.
He didn't trust Cason to keep it together in front of his peers.
Right.
So I would end up taking Jackson to a soccer game, and you would end up staying home with Cason.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I could, I would, I helped coach some of the teams, or when the game's over, I'd take them to McDonald's for lunch or something.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to maintain with other members of the team, right?
Right.
Trying to maintain that sort of normal facade for him,
mm-hmm.
so that he was spending time with kids his age who their dads were doing things. And I think what was good about that was there were a lot of moms who went to the soccer games, but there were a lot of times when the dads would take their kids to lunch after the game. And so I think he felt a little more normal there. He didn't see entire families, or many entire families there, and it felt like he didn't stick out like a sore thumb.
Right.
So that gave him a chance at normalcy and a chance to kind of do his own thing.
Right. Because there were a couple times where I was like, I really want to go and watch him.
And he wanted you to.
And he wanted me to, but he didn't want Cason there. And a couple times we would have our parents watch Cason, but there were other times where I would take Cason, but I would park. Like, I wouldn't get out of the car. I'd park so I could watch it. Or I would get out with Cason and we'd be really far away so Jackson wouldn't see Cason. So I was there, but not there. And so I would tell Jackson, oh, I saw you score the goal or win T-ball or whatever,
I'm sure people thought we were having marital problems.
I'm sure they did.
Because I'm on the sideline coaching and you're over in the parking lot sitting in a car or maybe standing outside of the car for moments.
Right, because I wouldn't go up and engage these other moms.
In a separate car.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
We didn't go in the same car.
No.
So it was not only environmentally unconscious,
Right.
it was we were separated. Right?
And I mean, there were times down the line that we would allow Cason to go for a little bit, and Jackson was okay with it as long as Cason was quiet.
Yeah.
But the minute anything started happening, which is fine, and I would take Cason out or whatever. But at this time, we kind of like Jackson never had play dates over at the house. Now, when he was little, we had like play group over or whatever, but he did not want anybody over at our house.
Right.
He knew like Cason had punched a hole in the wall, and we'd fix it, but then there'd be another hole or something else was broken or Cason ripped more blinds out or whatever. And Jackson just did not want any association with that.
Right.
And so
and why would he?
And why would he? And so once he starts school and things like that, I'd be like, and Cason was in school now too at St. Timothy. I'd be like, do you want like on the day they got out early, would you want me to see if so-and-so can come over and play? And he'd be like, no, because he was so afraid that Cason was going to come home.
Yeah.
And interrupt.
And, to contribute, and this is not necessarily about Jackson, but it goes back to some of the things we've talked about previously about the economic, burdens that come on here. So we're driving 2 cars to a soccer game. We're now seeing the play therapist. Jackson's got his own therapies he's going through that are not covered by insurance. We had to buy a different car to protect him.
Yeah.
I mean, the hits just keep on coming as we're trying to maintain this normalcy. It all comes with a cost that is neither of our kids' fault,
right?
But as a result of both of our kids,
right?
So we're trying to navigate rising expenses against the environment of our household being rocked by these emotional issues. I mean, it was a lot to navigate. It was frustrating for us, but at the same time, we knew how frustrating it was for Jackson. And we were just like any parent who can. We were just trying to do everything we could to provide him with the best life. And we mentioned this before. Jackson's also going to a private school because we felt that with his emotional needs that he needed a little bit more nurturing environment,
smaller nurturing environment.
Right. Yeah. And again, we had bought our house intending to send both our kids to the local school in a good school district, but that didn't work out. So we're doing everything we can
because we wanted Jackson. Part of that is the guilt that we were feeling. We wanted to give him the best opportunity to be successful and to feel loved and to, just, we felt so bad for what he was having to deal with.
Yeah.
And I was saying like summers for Jackson were horrible.
Right.
They were hell. They were horrible for me, but for him, especially because back to the fact that he couldn't escape anything. When he got into school full time, he was away. He didn't have to deal with Cason, but summers he's back into being at home, isolated. He didn't want, like I said, people over. Cason, we've talked about, he didn't have camps to go to get Cason out of the house, so I had to find little day camps and stuff like that for Jackson to go to. He ended up going to a sleepaway camp for 1 week, a couple summers, but
again, it's that separation.
Everything was separate. Yeah. But we start noticing that he wanted to be gone, yet he was angry with us for him being gone because he starts to see, well, Cason gets to spend time with mommy. I want to spend time with Mommy.
And now we're getting back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago about the feelings that he is, the conflict he's having, the observations he's having about how we treat Cason, and what his perceptions of those are.
Right.
I think for a very long period of Jackson's childhood, he perceived our constant attention being on Cason as a choice. That we wanted to spend time with Cason and did not want to spend time with him.
Right.
Obviously, that was as far from true as possible, but in his mind, that's what he was.
That's what a kid's mind.
That's what he was interpreting.
Yeah. So
he felt we were sending him away to camp.
Right. Even if it was like a couple hours at a day camp or something. I mean, he enjoyed it. He had fun at them, but we start noticing his frustration towards you and me and his anger towards us because he sees that Cason's not doing this, even though Cason would not do well at those camps, and we know that, but Jackson sees it as you and me are sending him off, and that starts down a whole path that we're going to get into the next episode. But
that lays it out very well to hang the episode here.
Well, but I was going to say though, prior to this, right about this same time, and he's I'd say third grade-ish, like early elementary, we start noticing Jackson. The school notices it too, that like nobody knew he had a brother. He never even talked about Cason. And I went for a teacher conference thing, and I don't remember what grade it was, but it was early elementary. And I mentioned something to the teacher, oh, Jackson's brother. And she was like, I didn't know that he had a brother. And I didn't know. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I explained, and like Jackson didn't tell any peers at school he had a brother. He was just really, really separating himself. And we knew it, but at the same time, we didn't really understand how much Jackson was separating from Cason. Like, again, we said earlier, he was, with the play therapy and stuff, he was angry and resentful and whatever of Cason. But the fact that he wasn't acknowledging Cason to anybody was eye-opening. And about the same time, he starts to see, and I think one of the teachers had expressed it to me, maybe why he doesn't say that he has a brother is because I think at some point Jackson had said something about my brother's brain doesn't work, or my brother's brain's broken, or whatever.
Brain plays tricks on him.
Yeah. And kids don't understand that. Yeah. And I think he was feeling the difference. Okay, my family is different. This isn't normal for mom to not come to the soccer games, or my mom and dad to both be together, and to have a brother that's this way. This is weird. I don't want to be different, and I'm very different. Not only am I adopted, which makes me very different, but now I have this brother who's very different, and it makes me stick out, and I don't like it. Right. And you and I start to see this a little bit with those parents. Some of the parents, they start to find out a little bit that we have a very different child. And I don't know if you want to call it, but the stigma of mental illness, maybe?
It's highly coincidental, if nothing else.
Yeah, the quote, fear from other parents and their kids, and how that all starts to play into how Jackson feels. And we'll get into that in this next episode. But
yeah, we'll talk about more of his formative years in the next episode, where he starts to experience different feelings in different social settings that are outside of the house, and how that affects him growing up. So we'll kind of get into his middle school and high school years on our next episode. But I believe that will conclude today's episode. You'll just have to come back and see us for the rest of the story. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And this is Specialness. We'll see you next time.